All right, everybody, we are back again for another episode of The Coach's Compass. And don't know what episode we're on. I just know that we're on season 2 because we just continue to bring on cool guests from all across the world and continue to bring it up to talk about cool topics. It's good boy, Coach Coop. Coach J can't be with us tonight because it is 9 p.m. where he is at, and he currently is getting done with practice, and we're trying to figure out the whole time schedule. It is what it is. But we got another cool guest with us here today. We got Coach Tess, the director of VCU Women's Basketball Sports Performance. She also is a Dartmouth softball alumni. Coach, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited.
What got you excited about being a strength and conditioning coach?
Oh, you got to take it all the way back to high school. Let's see. I feel like this is maybe like a little bit of a cliche story, but when I was 14, 15, and it was like time to start getting serious about recruiting and like honestly assessing like, okay, what level do you want to play at / like what level can you actually play at? Everyone wants to go D1, like all that. And one of my travel coaches was like, listen, Tess, like you're just not strong enough to go play Division I softball. So I took that as like a full challenge of like, well, let me show you that I am. So my little 14-year-old self went and found our high school football strength coach, and I asked him to teach me how to lift, and that was like really what sparked it all. And so I ended up in like I think it was actually like a women's basketball like weights period, and he taught me how to lift, and from there like I started to kind of fall in love with training. But I would say like when it really like I was like training is like what I love to do, and I want to take this further than just like something I do for a sport, was my senior year of high school. I ended up not playing my senior year of high school softball. So if you play softball, like you don't need high school ball. High school ball is just like what you play while the college world is doing its thing and all the recruiting has like stopped. So like I had already committed to Dartmouth at that point. Like I already knew I was going to go play at the next level. So I was like, okay, like this team is not really like this team is not helping me become like a better player in terms of just like the environment it was. No, they were actually good. It just like it was not the most like positive environment mentally. And so it was like, okay, do I want to spend every day in this, or do I want to go do something that's really going to make me better? And so I found a private sector facility and I started training. And that was like when I really got introduced to like training to be an athlete. And I just like fell in love with training. And one day one of the coaches was like, Tess, like you could do this as a job. And it was just like light, like, like one of those things where like all the fireworks go off and the light bulb comes on. And I was like, okay, like that's it. This is what I need to be doing. Like I can do this as a job. Like sign me up right now.
Nice. So then when softball ended though, like, so what was that period like? Softball's over, but you kind of already have in the back of your mind what you're going to do next. Was there never like a time of, I guess, sadness that you're no longer going to be like a true called an athlete anymore? Now you got to go into the side of coaching athletes, and it's done for.
So yes and no. More no though. So like I knew going into college that I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach, which like at 18 is a very rare thing to be like, yes, this is it. Like I know my path. And like luckily this path stayed true so far. So when I was actually like choosing colleges, I was trying to decide like basically between a school that offered a kinesiology degree and a school in Dartmouth. And Dartmouth was my dream school. Like that was like number one on my list, which is it's always very surreal to me to say like I got to go play at my dream school because so very few people get to like have that experience,
Right.
And so sorry. And so I ultimately chose Dartmouth because like I can't say no to my dream school, but they don't have the degree that I need. And so I was like, I'm just gonna go work as many internships as I can. So the second I got done my freshman year, I started working strength and conditioning internships. So I worked 5 different strength and conditioning internships throughout my college career. So like I was prepping my entire college career to basically like step into a coaching role and like doing it as I was an athlete. And so because I was doing it like as I was an athlete, the transition was easier because like I would already kind of bounce back and forth between being a coach for a semester during the summer or being an intern and then come back, okay, now I'm an athlete again for like the next 6 months. And so the transition was relatively smooth. I do think the hard part about the transition for me was like I was a COVID kid, so I lost my senior season at COVID. So like and like the way the Ivy League works is you can't, if you're a spring sport, like you can't play as like a master's student. Also, the master's programs they have are like very select. Like it's like, okay, you have to basically go to medical school or start prepping for law. And I was like, okay, that's not the route I'm going down. I'm smart, but not like let me go to med school smart. And so I already had accepted a grad assistant position, and I was like pretty set on like starting my career. Like I had really made peace. Like this is my last year of softball. I'm okay with that. I'm ready to start this career. Like I've been doing internships for the last 4 or 5 years. Like I'm really ready to like go take a GA spot, have my own teams, and roll with that, and start learning and being a part of this field full time. And so we ended up, they canceled our season, and I ended up just eating my last year starting my career. So I think like that part made the transition a little bit hard because like being a coach right away after losing my senior season that I never got, that like sometimes made me a little bit sad, but I was prepping for the transition whether I realized it or not, like my entire college career.
Yeah, but I said that's a pretty quick transition, but also like I guess you could say a pretty young transition too. You know what I mean like you go straight into coaching at being what 21, 22, and now you're coaching kids that are pretty much like close to your age, like 3 years, 4 years younger than you. Like looking at the freshmen, they're coming in, you're like, oh well, that was just me like 4 years ago. How was it to kind of command the room when you kind of got that GA and that coaching position, working with people that are close to your age?
It was tough for sure. Especially I think like I spent time in the Dartmouth weight room, and like different schools have different types of athletes, right? So it's like you get different a lot of different personalities. And so transitioning to my GA position, it was definitely like a slate of personalities that I didn't have as much experience with. But like you said, like the hardest part was that I was 22 when I started as a grad assistant, and it's like, hey, here's 3 teams and you're a football assistant. I had kids who were 24 or 25, and they're looking at me like, you're our coach. And I'm like, yeah, like I know I was a college athlete 3 months ago, but here we are. And I felt like the advice I heard a lot was like you have to set your boundaries really clear, right? Like it's easier to come in a little bit harsher or colder or however you want to word it and then ease up versus the opposite way. And I think like trying to figure out like, but also you want to be like authentic and personable and you want to be someone that they can connect with. And like that was a hard line to figure out for me being so young in the field. And so that definitely, I feel like each year it's gotten easier and easier. I definitely think it's easier to create that line as I've gotten older into the field. But like those first initial years, like 22, 23, 24, when I still had athletes who were like exactly my age, it was it was definitely tough and took some time to learn how to navigate being a coach but still creating relationships with my kids.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine it was like that's kind of you kind of talked about that position in the way that I looked at going into maybe becoming a football coach when my career was over. It was like, man, I don't want to start at like 22 because a lot of these kids are my age. And, man, it's going to be hard for me to draw the line because I was just playing with these guys or I was just playing alongside or with like against them. And so it was a hard line to kind of figure out. Luckily, I was able to continue on my playing career because it's a little bit different for softball and football. But I know I looked at the interview that you had where you said that none of it is luck. You know what I mean? The position that you're in now is something that you work for, right? Have people actually like doubted your knowledge or asked like the position, the roles that you've been given or earned, and like not kind of gone past like, and if so, like how do you overcome that? And again, like I said before we were off air, like I'm trying to really avoid the question of like what it's like to be a female in a male dominated industry, but that's it's still a huge topic. You know what I mean? Like we're in 2024, but you're a coach, right? You knew from 18 that you wanted to become a strength and conditioning coach. You studied, you did 5 internships on top of playing, right? Like all these things speak to the credibility of the knowledge that you have in this industry. So why do people, continue to question that and say that it's, oh, you're lucky to be in that position?
I think it's because this is a field where you definitely don't necessarily always see like all the behind the scenes work. I also think that because I started young, I had some experiences really young. I haven't gotten that response or that statement made as much, especially like in the last year or two of my career, especially as I've gotten older. But definitely earlier, I could feel that sentiment sometimes. I think people don't always realize like all the work that someone is doing on their own. And so if you ask me like, hey, how did you get these positions? Like, I'll tell you like this is the amount of people I reached out to. These like I've made Excel sheets. I've reached out to hundreds of schools looking for internships, even if they weren't posted. Like I reached out to these people, I kept in contact with these people, and like a little bit of it is luck, to be honest, because you have to be in the right place at the right time, right? And I think especially when it's true to like my NFL experiences, like so many of these things in the field are connected. For example, I got a training camp internship with the Falcons in 2021. So I was with them for their first half of training camp. Okay. It just so happens that their director of strength and conditioning at the time knew one of the strength coaches at Middle Tennessee State. They happened to have a women's basketball position come open. Like, I didn't know any of those people to start. And they were the ones who recommended me to interview for Middle Tennessee State. Like, if I wouldn't have gone to the Falcons, I would have never got the Middle Tennessee interview, and I probably would have finished my second year at my grad assistant stop. So, like, yeah, that was, like, lucky. But I also did the work to put myself in a position to be lucky. So I think, like, maybe that's a better way to look at it, is, like, people don't always see, like, the groundwork that you're doing and, like, the things that you do in, day out to create those opportunities where the right things come along at the right time for you. But on the same vein, there is a lot of times where it's like I have that self-doubt where, like, if I'm going through an interview process for like an exciting new job, or like I just get an opportunity that just like seems like perfect, or like something that I really wanted to like have an opportunity to do, it's like, okay, like you have those moments of self-doubt where you're like, is this just luck? Like, did someone, like, is this a prank? Like, I've definitely had those moments where I have to, like, remind myself, like, no, you've done A, B, C, D, and E to put yourself in a position to have this opportunity. And, like, at the end of the day, when you step into these opportunities, like, I still have to make the best out of it. Like, I interned with the Rams when I was 20 years old, which is psychotic. Like, I, to this day, cannot believe they let me in that weight room at 20.
What year was that?
And that was 2018. I was a junior in college.
2018. Did you know? Was that when they had Hard Knocks there?
No. I don't think so.
Okay.
That was the next year. That was 1 or 2 years after that, because it was during the COVID year they had Hard Knocks.
Yeah, yeah. Were you there with a coach named Coach Keenan Smith? He's a wide receiver coach.
I might have been. I can't remember. Honestly, I was
Because it's funny
terrified.
because
I
we
don't think
talked
I said
about
a
before,
word.
yeah, like how the connections. Because I have Coach Corey here, but Coach Keenan is also another one of our coaches at D1 West Nashville. So it's like, man, there's probably a lot of our lines that have crossed.
There
But
probably
continue on.
are.
Sorry.
No. I mean, there might have been. Like, I was terrified. Like, I don't think I said a word to anybody, like, my first month in
I
that
mean, 20
building.
years old in the
Yeah.
NFL, or you're talking about like this is the top of the top of athletes. Like shit. What am I doing here?
No, that was literally, I was like, there's no way. Like, someone made a mistake. Somewhere, someone made a mistake and let me in this building. But on the same vein, like, I'm having those thoughts, but I'm also like, okay, like, when they started me on the internship, they were like, hey, we're going to start you with like 2 days a week. You'll come in from like whatever, 6, 7 a.m. to like noon. And then as you show that you're learning and show your value, we can start to add time, yada, yada, yada. And by the end, like, I was there every day. I would be there all the way from 6 a.m. to like the end of, whatever the workday was, 4 or 5 p.m. And like, I slowly became like a full-time intern over the season. And I think back to that a lot, especially when I'm like, okay, was it luck? Was it not? It's like, well, regardless if you were lucky enough to have an opportunity, you still have to like go in there and make the most out of it. And so like, I could have totally screwed that opportunity up. Like, I could have not done a good job. I could have whatever. But like, that was my opportunity to do something or not do something with. So like, yeah, is there a little bit of luck sometimes? Sure. But like, way more of it is actually executing and putting the time in to where like luck is not going to carry you forever, especially if you like continue to get good opportunities. And I think that's like something else that I've had to remind myself when I feel like, oh, this is just luck, like whatever, like someone just heard my name and they just pass it along, whatever. It's like, no, you continue to have opportunities to prove yourself as a coach. So that like it wouldn't keep happening over and over again if it was just luck. Like there has to be something concrete here for you to like settle on. So get it out of your head that you're just lucky to have multiple opportunities in your career.
Do you still have all the Excel spreadsheets with all the numbers and everything you reached out to? Are you still using that?
No, that was like, I think now it's better where it's like, okay, I know like my circle and the people that I like to reach out to routinely, and I've established more like what my network is. But that was like how I found my GA spot. Like I literally created an Excel sheet. I wish I was like this organized when I actually did college work. Like I don't know why I was more organized. I was 10 times more organized looking for a strength and
It was
conditioning
something you were
job
getting paid by. It was something you
yeah.
could. I know when I was in school, like you could, I could give two shits about any of the tests or anything that I was studying unless it had to do with football or some side of, strength and conditioning. So I get it. I understand.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, yeah, stats couldn't tell you what was going on, but you need an Excel sheet of all the Power Five football programs. I've got you covered. I can
Got
tell you
it.
exact.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. I mean, but that'd be great if you still had it because then you could potentially pass it on to the next one that's trying to, get into a role that you're trying to like did and everything like that. On top of that, who are you still learning from in industry? Right? Like who are some coaches that you look up to that are kind of people that you role model after and kind of ask questions to and continue to broaden your own knowledge?
I think a big one, or someone that rely a lot on for their knowledge, is her name is Azita. She's a doctor of physical therapist. She's with the Washington Spirit, so she like does strength and conditioning and PT, dual role, and she's just like she's like so knowledgeable. I just feel like anytime I have like a return to play question, or just even like decision making on how to handle return to play, how it ties into strength and conditioning, like all those aspects of like that category of topics, she's like my go-to person. And I feel like every time I have a conversation with her, I learn something brand new. And so she's a big one for me. In terms of like, I would say more like programming X's and O's, I don't necessarily know if it's like one person. I think more it's like as I've been in the field and you kind of create your network of people who you feel comfortable having those conversations with, and you feel comfortable being vulnerable of like, I don't know how to handle this situation, I don't know how to program for this person, XYZ. Then it's more like, okay, now I have my 3 or 4 people like, hey, have to run this type of conditioning test. I've never ran it before for a team. Like, have you ran it? Do you know someone who's ran it? Like stuff like that. So I don't think it's like one particular person, more just like my network has become my go-to people for that.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to have a network, right? Why only stick to like one person? Um, there's plenty of coaches out there to learn from, no matter what sector they're in. What would you consider like your niche in this industry? You know what I mean? Like in strength and conditioning field, like do you love speed? Do you like jumping? Like what are strength, Olympic lifts? Like where are we at in this?
Okay. This question, I always find this question to be tough because I feel like I've had to play so many roles. Honestly, working in football, I feel like a lot of the times I've had to learn whatever I can become an asset in. So like whatever that
Yeah.
staff needs, like now that's all of a sudden what I'm interested in. So it's like, oh, I need to be better at coaching speed work. Great. Like I'm going to get better at coaching speed work. Oh, like we don't have someone who wants to do return to play. Like I better get better at return to play. But my niche I've realized is becoming much more like on the mental performance side. So my master's degree is in sports psychology. I'm currently working towards becoming like a certified sports psychologist as well. And so that's the area that I would consider is becoming my niche. I think eventually I want to go get my doctorate in sports psychology or something psychological. And I just think that for me, like the mental performance side, especially like as an athlete, was something I really struggled with. Like especially playing a game like softball, right, where it's like, I mean, it's so cliche, but like if you hit, 3 out of 10 times, like you're failing 70% of the time, and that means you're a great player. So I think like for me, like the mental side of it in college was something I had to work through, especially in high school. Like I actually worked with a mental performance coach in high school, and it definitely changed my career for the better because so much of like where I struggled was just like confidence to play or confidence in my abilities. It wasn't like the actual physical abilities I did or didn't have. And I think you see a lot of athletes where it's like if you just had a better approach or you learned how to create better approaches for yourself, like a lot of these things that you struggle with would be a lot better. Like I was talking with a couple of my kids the other day and we were talking about our run test and it was like, okay, like, well, how do you approach this? Like mentally, like you get very overwhelmed by this test. So like, what's your approach? And they're like, I don't know. I just like kind of like run it. And I'm like, okay, so the test is overwhelming and you've just run it. Like, let's actually like break this down. And I explained to them like, hey, like when for me, like playing 7 innings, like I used to pitch. I said playing 7 innings and thinking like I have to pitch 7 innings was so overwhelming to me. I was like, that's a lot of batters. That's a lot of things that can go wrong. Like it just like it would
Oh
spiral so
yes.
quick. Yes. And so like for me, I know if I think about something as like if I make it too big in my head, that will cause me to spiral. So like a lot of times in softball, I would break it down to like, okay, 3 outs at a time. And like or like even conditioning in college, like, hey, we have like 2 sets of whatever, 100-yard striders. We have 10 reps per set. I'm like, holy crap, that's a lot of running for me. There's a reason I played softball. Like this is too much. And I just break it down like, okay, like, hey, you're going to go 2 reps. If you do 2 reps, then like that's 1/5 of your set done. And so like for me, that was the like that was the approach that worked. And so helping people like break it down into approaches, I like that aspect of it. As well as like understanding that like one approach isn't going to work for everything. So like you can't just have like one tool in your toolbox. Like you need to have multiple ways. Like because if it might be one day where, hey, like this this worked for me one day, but like, you know what, that next day I was spiraling even quicker, even harder, and I needed something different. Or like, there's just like you can't just have like a one thing to fix everything when mentally you're not locked in, if that makes sense.
Makes plenty of sense. Speaking into existence, coach. I love it. Stepping into a new role in the industry. I mean, it's huge right now, right? We look at mental health, right? For a lot of these athletes, like a lot of athletes don't have a place to go to. And if you have the old school coaches that are just like, hey, just shut up and play. Hey, like just show up and do your job, right? Like that's such a, I wouldn't say it's bad, right? I would say there is some merit to like that, but there's also a side of like being able to talk about, what's actually going on and making them, because everybody talks about mental toughness, but what actually is mental toughness? Like you were able to break things down into 3 outs, right? Some players aren't able to do that. It's a hard road to go down. So I think what you're doing is incredible. Wanting to study that and get the doctorate in it. Now I have a question for you from one of our former guests that have been on,
Okay.
and they asked, what would you do if you didn't coach?
This is a good question. I actually had a whole mid-college crisis about my career. Mid-college, I know, because I had like, okay, anyways. And so I'd always been like really fascinated with like our prison systems and the laws that worked around that. And I took a class on it in college, and there was like this portion of the class where they were talking about the 3-strike rule, and they were talking about how like if we double the fines or double the punishment for gang members when they commit a crime, then this will negate them from committing crimes. And I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're using you're using a different type of logic. Like their logic isn't the same logic. And like from person to person, like your logic is not the same. So how can you say that like this rule is gonna like I was like there's clearly like to me I was like, oh, there's a huge disconnect between like the laws and rules and like the methods that we're using to try to reduce everything to do with our prison system and prison numbers and all this stuff. And it like literally like I was so into it that I was like, should I become a lawyer? Like, do I need to take a hard left turn here and go into like prison reform and become a lawyer and like, and like I really thought about it because I was like, okay, like if you're gonna go to law school, like you probably need to put some classes up, like
You got to take a hard
ultimately,
left,
yeah,
hard
yeah.
left.
Call home, hey mom,
Coach, you
actually,
don't
no
need to turn the
strength and
blink on, bro.
conditioning.
Just turn.
Yeah, we just gonna go back from the way we came from.
Yeah.
So yeah, I probably would have been some sort of lawyer or something like that. I think that's probably the route I would have gone down, which would have been more appropriate, honestly, for an Ivy League degree. I get the question all the time. Like, literally, someone told me last night, they were like, you have an Ivy League degree and you're a strength and conditioning coach? And I was like, yes. They're like, that's not typical. I was like, no, it's not. Correct.
Who likes to be typical anyway? Yeah, that's kind of
Exactly.
a boring route to go down. What is something you'd want us to ask our next guest?
If, since being in the field, what has been one of your bigger shifts in perspective? I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Actually,
What's
like,
yours?
as so like I'm 26 now. Like I said, I started in the field when I was like 18, 19 years old, started full time when I was 22. I think my biggest shift is just my priorities. When you're 22 and 23, it's really easy to just be like, whatever, I'm moving here, I'm doing this, it's all for the job, it's all about the career, I don't have any strings attached to me. But like as you get older and the things change that are important to you, and maybe you have a family or you miss your family and this job takes you all over. Like my family's in California. Like I've been on this side of the country now for 8, 9 years.
Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, I went to school in New Hampshire and then basically like never made it back further than past Tennessee and Illinois. So I just think like as I've gotten older and you start to realize like this is going to sound so jaded, but I promise it's not. As you start to realize like what this field is, the pros of it, the cons of it, and the factors that you can control and honestly the factors that you can't control, like you can still do everything right. And I just had this conversation the other day with someone like, you can do everything right in your career and you can be a fantastic coach and be a great person, and you may never get the position that you is like your dream position because of XYZ external things that you just have no control over, to be quite honest. And I think like when you're in this field at the beginning, it's like naive, but just like you're just so excited. Like it's like how I think about like freshmen when they come to college, like they still have the sparkle in their eye, like they don't know what's coming their way yet, like they don't understand like how long a season is, and like they're just so excited to be there. And it's like, yeah, I still love my job. Like I'm still excited every day I get to go in, and like very fortunate to get to work a career like this. But you do start to become more realistic when you start to look like, okay, what do I want in my life outside of like this job? Does this job match up with that? Like, how does all these things now fit together as I like actually try to build a life versus like being 22, fresh out of college, just like really excited to have your first team. And so I just think like as that perspective, as I've moved through my career the last like 4 or 5 years, that perspective has started to shift and just like made me kind of rethink like what are my priorities and like where does coaching fit into that.
I love it, Coach. And we're gonna stop it right there. Like, there's nothing else to say. Like, you put it all on the spot for the Coach. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you for sharing insider tips and also being real with us. You know where you started at to where you're at now, and I love that last question. You know what I mean? Figuring out what those priorities are, because as you were 22, like I said for myself too, when I was 22, and just F it, I'm just gonna go travel the world and move every 6 months. Priorities change, right? 32 now with a kid and lives in Sweden and need to make money to be able to go back and forth. It changes the way you view things and how you move about. But I want to say I'm super proud of you. I'm excited to follow your journey of where you continue to go, and thank you for being here with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
And we're out.